All right, chapter 3, section 1, quadratic functions. Graphs of quadratic functions, this is quadratic form, but we have seen this as standard form. So I'm just going to go ahead and write that on there. Standard form. Okay. There is also a standard form, but we're going to call that vertex form. So we'll be a little bit more specific when you guys see it on your test. And I'll definitely remind you of which one we're writing so you can kind of study that format or verbiage of it. Okay. We've seen ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, we've definitely seen that last semester, so we're going to be working with that again. So looking at this diagram, what's what? Okay, this point in red is called your axis of symmetry. Okay, what is that? That means it's the lowest possible point on my function. Okay, keep in mind we're dealing with quadratic functions. And our quadratic functions were the U-shaped. So when you're graphing for these, they're going to be in a U shape. Okay, yes, you still have to know 2.5 graphs, but for quadratic functions, we're doing our little U shapes. Okay, so whether it's going up or down, that's what we're graphing. So vertex could either be the lowest point, or if I were to graph it this way, it could also be the highest point. Okay, vertex is represented as HK, so please make sure you know that. And again, there's a minimum and a maximum of a vertex. Axis of symmetry, you guys have seen this word before. What that means is it's like a mirror. It's a mirror image. So for example, if -1 is my axis of symmetry, let's just say I'm graphing something and I have -3, 4. My axis of symmetry is -1. Where is my point going to be on the other side? All you're doing is counting. 1, 2, 1, 2. My dot's also going to be over here. Okay, same thing if it was a larger, or let's say the dot was further out, all you're doing is counting. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So please make sure you know those two, because you guys will get questions where it says, okay, what is your axis of symmetry and what is your vertex? All right, looking at this graphing an equation in quadratic form. How are we graphing in quadratic form? Find your vertex. Okay, in the last slide, vertex is HK. You still have an X and a Y. H is represented as your X. K is represented as your Y for your vertex, and vertex is written as an ordered pair, so just make sure you remember that. However, how am I solving for it? Your formula for vertex is right here. X equals -b over 2a. And once you solve for your X, you're then going to plug your X in to find your Y. So once we get to the examples, you'll see where I'm plugging in, and it's just going in place of my Y. Then plot the Y-intercept and your X-intercept depending on which one you're able to. So once you see the next example, or the example, you're going to see there may be one where you're going to get a weird number, and if you plug it into a calculator, you're going to get a decimal, and you can't really plot that. Okay, so if you can't necessarily plot, let's say, your Y-intercept, if you need an additional information, plug it in and use your X-intercept. So it just depends on what the question's asking. All right, like I said before, standard form. This one also says standard form, but we're going to use this as vertex form, so just write that on there. Okay, again, and we'll be a little bit specific once we have the test. I'll tell you which one we're going to be writing. Okay, so this is vertex form. This one's a little bit easier, and you'll see it in the example once we get to the example on the next slide. You'll see why this one's easier to graph because you really have the information there. What do I mean by have the information there? When you're looking at this one, you have your vertex. Your vertex is your H. Keep in mind it's not the sign, it's just the H. And your K. So this one's pretty easy when they're giving it to you in vertex form. You're going to be able to identify your vertex quickly. Also, you're going to be able to identify your line of symmetry because your line of symmetry is your X value in your vertex, okay? It's your X value in your vertex. And again, like I said, we're going to get to the example in the next slide and you're going to be able to see that. All right, so this we can see is written in vertex form. This one should be easier than the next example because we don't really have to solve here. Everything's really given to us. So if I'm looking at this question, I am going to go ahead and find my vertex. Because it's written in that vertex form, it's a lot easier for me to find my information here. So looking at it, what would my vertex be? Okay, that's what I'm going to ask myself. What would my vertex be? So if I'm looking at it, I have to know that vertex form, which f of x equals, this is my formula, a times x minus h squared plus k. And remember, your vertex is your h and your k. So looking at it, what is my h? Okay, but look at the formula. So it's not going to be a 2 because if I were to rewrite this, I want to have that subtraction sign. So if I write minus negative 2, it's going to give me that plus. So this number right here is going to be my h. And what's my k? Good, a negative 3. Okay, so please pay attention to your signs. Another thing, you have to be specific when you're writing your answers. It is an ordered pair. So you have to make sure if you're writing it as an ordered pair, it has the parentheses around it. If it doesn't, it's going to be some points off. So please make sure you're more specific. Okay, so can anybody tell me what is my axis of symmetry? Negative 2. It's my x. So this number right here is my axis of symmetry. Okay, that's pretty easy. So let's just graph right now what we have. I have my vertex, which is negative 2, negative 3, negative 2, 1, 2, 3, negative 3 right here. And then I have my axis of symmetry. Remember, axis of symmetry is that mirror. So I'm just going to go ahead and put a dotted line just so I know where my mirror is. Okay. Next, I have to be able to figure out where my curves are. So I'm going to solve for my x-intercept first and see if I can graph it. So how am I solving for my x-intercept? If I'm solving for x, that means I have to set y equal to 0. In this case, we don't necessarily see a y, but what that means is I'm solving for x. We did this before. Solving for x means I'm going to go ahead and I have x plus 2 squared minus 3. I'm setting it equal to 0. Okay, we did this last semester. I'm setting it equal to 0 and I'm solving for x. So what should I do first? Good, I'm going to go ahead and add 3 to both sides of my equal sign. I'm going to end up with x plus 2 squared equals 3. Now what am I going to do? I'm going to go ahead and square root both sides to get rid of that exponent. I'm going to end up with x plus 2 equals positive negative square root 3. And then what do I have to do next? Good. I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2. So now I have x equals negative 2 plus minus square root 3, and that's my answer for x. So pay attention to how I'm going to write my answer. I can't solve anything else, so that's it. So my x-intercept is going to be, remember, I have to write it as an ordered pair. I have my x, -2 plus minus square root 3. And remember, we set it equal to 0, so that means y is 0. Can I graph this? I mean, if I had a calculator, yes, but we're not going to have a calculator. So I'm not going to graph this one. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try and solve for my y-intercept. This one's a lot easier. What does that mean? If I'm solving for my y-intercept, that means I have to set my x equal to 0. So looking at it, x is going to be 0. All I'm doing is plugging in. I have 0 plus 2 squared minus 3. I'm going to have 2 squared minus 3. 2 squared is 4 minus 3, and I'm going to get 1. Now, can I graph this one? Yes, I can graph 0, 1. So looking at it, 0, 1 is right over here. And again, my axis of symmetry is my mirror. So if this is 2 units from the symmetry, the other dot must also be 2 units from the symmetry, and I can go ahead and graph. So my graph is going to look something like this. Okay, any questions here? So again, it's a lot, yes, but it's steps that you guys can do. Okay, you guys can definitely find these steps and solve them. So when you're answering this question, let's say you have it on a test. Do you need to show me all this information? Yes, I need your vertex, I need your axis of symmetry, I need your x-intercept and your y-intercept, and you need a graph. This is a lot of points for one question because there are so many factors here. So it's not hard, it's just a lot of little steps that you have to be able to answer. Looking at my next example, this one is written in standard form, quadratic form, and this one's a little bit more work. Why? Because my vertex is not given to me. I have to solve for my vertex. So when they're giving you something in quadratic form, you have to remember the formula for vertex. And I'm going to go ahead and write it up here at the top. I'm solving for my vertex, okay, which was my h, and the formula was -b over 2a. And we should know what our a, b, and c is here. So can anybody tell me what is my b? Good, it's -6, okay, it's a -6. So I have -6 over 2, and what's my a? It's just a 1 because there's nothing in front of my x. So solving this, pretty easy. Negative times a negative is a positive, so I'm going to have +6 over 2, and I'm going to get 3. Keep in mind, h is x, so for my vertex, I know I at least have 3. Okay, so this is my x value. Now I have to find my y. In order for me to find my y, all I have to do is plug in my x as 3. So plug in 3 for x. So solving for y, I'm going to have 3 squared minus 6 times 3 minus 14. 3 squared is going to give me 9 minus 18 minus 14. I'm then going to get -9 minus 14, and that's going to give me a -23. So right now I have my vertex, 3, -23. Again, it's not hard. It's basic math, which we can solve, but you have to remember the steps. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and graph it. I know the graph does not go up to 23, so I'm going to go by 4s on my y-axis. So because I'm going negative, I'm going to go ahead and write this is negative. Let me not do it in a highlighter. This is going to be -4, -8, -12, -16, -20, -24. okay? So my coordinates were 3, negative 23. So I'm gonna go over to the right 3 and then go down 23. So your dot should look somewhere right here. Okay, just estimate it. Okay, just a pretty estimation.
Is there going to be a question like this on there where we have to do that?
If there's a question like this, meaning a large number, your graph will most likely have them numbered for you. So don't worry about filling it in. Okay, can anybody tell me my axis of symmetry? 3. Okay, good, perfect. That one should be pretty easy. It's always the x value of your vertex. So my axis of symmetry is where x equals 3, and that's right here. Just putting my little, like I said, dotted line just to show my little mirror. And this is where my dot was before, not directly on, but right here. Yes, please make sure you guys write x equals 3 for your axis of symmetry. You have to be a little bit more specific because it's just that 3 line. It's where x equals 3, which is that mirror line. So yeah, you have to write x equals 3. Don't just write 3, please. All right, now solving for my intercepts. Going ahead and solving for my x-intercept. Setting it equal to 0, however, please go back to your notes and look at factoring. Okay, there are different ways to factor. This one cannot factor by looking at it and say, okay, what multiplies to negative 14 and adds to equal 6? It can't work. So you have to remember other ways to factor, quadratic, completing the squares. So in this case, last class said, oh my gosh, it's coming back to me. How am I factoring? I'm solving for, I'm putting in my blank space. Okay, I'm putting in that blank space and completing the square. Okay, so what does that mean? What does that look like? Just in case we forgot, I'm gonna have x squared minus 6x plus blank equals positive 14 plus blank. Okay, so all I did was I started with this and I moved this over. Okay, and now we have to remember that rule. It's going to be negative 6 over 2 squared. That's what I'm filling my blank with. So I'm going to have 3 squared, which is 9. Okay, again, you guys have to go back and look at factoring. I'm going to have x minus 3 squared equals 23, and I'm solving for x. Square rooting x minus 3 equals positive negative square root 23. Add 3 to both sides. X equals 3 plus minus square root 23. And again, I can't graph that. I could if I had a calculator and gave me that decimal, but this is going to be my answer for my x-intercept. 3 plus minus square root 23 comma 0. Okay, now my y-intercept's a lot easier. I'm setting x equal to 0. So looking at this question, setting x equal to 0, I'm going to have 0 squared minus 6 times 0 minus 14. I set x equal to 0, and I'm going to get negative 14. If you're given a question like this, it's just C. Okay, so I can graph my y-intercept. So looking at it, paying attention to how I'm going to graph, I'm going to go ahead and 0 means I'm not going side to side. I'm going to go down to negative 14. So kind of estimating that as best as you can. About right here. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. And again, it's a mirror image. Okay, it's a quadratic function, so it's a mirror image from my x-intercept, or my axis of symmetry. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then I can go ahead and graph. So this is where my graph should be. Now, what are we checking if you had this question on a test? I'm checking that there's all of these are here and that you graphed it. I mean, for this number, it's pretty large, but as accurate as possible, and it's going through those 3 specific places. Okay, questions on this one? All right, please check your work and remember how to factor.